If you are new to winter sowing, what winter sowing basically is planting some seeds into a clear container that can act as a greenhouse. The container will need an opening at the top to allow ventilation and to allow water to penetrate the container and water the seeds that are in there. And then you place it outdoors in winter temperatures, and this container will sort of act as a greenhouse, and eventually the plants will sprout outdoors in the cold temperatures. If you are new here, my name is Chantel, and today we are going to be doing some winter sowing. So what are the benefits of winter sowing? Winter sowing basically allows the seeds that you planted in these containers, whether it's milk jugs or any sorts of clear containers that have a lid that can act as a greenhouse. So it will allow these seeds to go through a cold period. And that cold period is known as stratification. It's a period that a lot of plants need in order to sprout, in order to begin the germination process. Some plants benefit from stratification, but they don't necessarily need stratification to germinate. But the stratification will help them to be stronger and bigger when they do germinate in this kind of environment. And some plants do require stratification in order to germinate. And those plants that do require it are going to be your perennials. So by doing winter sowing, you are basically skipping a step of stratifying your seeds before planting them. This is an all-in-one method. You are stratifying and planting your seeds at the same time. You don't have to do each one separately. So what is the difference between stratifying and winter sowing? As I have mentioned, with winter sowing, you are stratifying your seeds. But what stratification is allowing the seeds to go through a cold period before planting. It's basically simulating winter environments, which is why winter sowing is perfect for stratification. So to simulate winter environment, if you are doing it indoors in the different stratification methods, you might put the seed packet in the fridge. This is something that I do. I find that the easiest form of stratification, other than winter sowing, of course. And you place it in the fridge for 3 to 6 weeks or something like that. Some plants need more, some plants need less. And then you plant your seeds. Other methods of stratification are going to be taking a damp paper towel, moist paper towel, and putting it in a Ziploc bag, putting the seeds on it, and allowing them to go through those cold periods in the fridge as well. In that damp and cold environment, again, you are simulating the winter environment, and then you take those seeds and you plant them immediately in whichever medium you want to plant them in. So basically the difference between stratification and winter sowing is that one, you are doing that step ahead of time in stratification. By putting it in the fridge, you're simulating the winter environment and then planting the seeds, and you can plant them in a warm environment at that time. The winter sowing method, you are doing both stratifying and planting at the same time, because outside, the temperatures outside and the weather outside is doing it for you, so you don't have to worry about that step of stratifying. Another benefit of winter sowing is that these containers that you plant your seeds in will act as a greenhouse. In the beginning of the winter, when the temperatures are cold, it's going to allow the seeds to go through that cold period because there's not enough sunlight that's warming up the container and the temperatures are super cold, so it's not going to get warm in these containers, whether you're using milk jugs or clear containers with putting some small pots inside them and planting the seeds in the pots. Those clear containers will of course have a lid. So whether you're doing it in milk jugs or clear containers that you can place some pots in it and plant the seeds in there. What was I saying? I forgot what I was saying because I was trying to say something and I totally got distracted with trying to figure out the best way to say it. But once the temperatures warm up, these containers are going to start acting as greenhouses. And that greenhouse effect is going to cause the seedlings to germinate, because different types of seedlings germinate at different temperatures. So each seedling is going to germinate at the appropriate temperature once those temperatures hit. And they will start growing in the containers that you have planted them in, and they will be ready for the outdoors temperatures because they're already acclimated to it pretty much. Because, like for example, this milk container over here, it has this big opening right here that's allowing air, it's allowing rain, it's allowing all sorts of things to penetrate this container, and it's not a very thick container. It is pretty thin, so the plants are going to feel a lot of the environment that's present outside because it's not a super insulative container. which is what you want. You don't want to create basically a greenhouse because you do want them to go through those cold periods. I know I said you don't want to create a greenhouse, but this turns into a greenhouse once the temperatures start to warm up. When it comes to hardening off your plants, if you're using the winter sowing method, you basically don't need to do that much because these plants are already acclimated to the outdoors weather, and all you need to do is open up that container once the temperatures start to warm up. And that is going to be different for each type of plant because each plant can survive at different types of temperatures. So if you have, let's say, cabbage and it can tolerate cooler weather, then you can open that container as soon as the temperatures start to go above the hard frost level. And if you have something that needs maybe warmer weather, then you want to open the container when the temperatures are above frost levels, or maybe even in the 40s or 50s. Depending on what you have in there. On the other hand, if you are planting your seedlings indoors, the hardening off will look something completely different. That would be taking them in and out multiple days to acclimate them to the outside environment. So with the winter sowing method, it kind of takes that load off of you and you don't have to worry about the hardening off of the plants. So now let's talk about what plants are suitable for winter sowing. You can plant almost anything when it comes to winter sowing. Although I have experienced that if the seeds are surface sown, that winter sowing method doesn't necessarily work that well with them. Because if at any time during the germination process those seeds dry off, then those plants are not going to germinate for you. And if something is surface sown, that surface of the soil is going to dry off very quickly. It's going to be the first thing that's going to dry off. So if you weren't on top of it and keeping it moist, those plants are not going to sprout. And because they are outside and they're experiencing all the wind and air and all that stuff that makes the plant stronger basically, but those elements also will dry off the surface of the soil. And from my personal experience, I have found that surface sown plants do not do very well in winter sowing because of the drying off of the soil. I've seen a few plants germinate from many plants that I have planted using this method. But other plants that love this method are going to be your perennials, your hardy perennials. Those are perennials that live in cold environments. And when the seeds are on the plant and they drop on the ground in the fall after they have developed, those seeds are going to go through those winter elements. They're going to go through the winter period with snow and rain and frost and all these things and frozen soil. So these seeds will experience all these things, and they actually need to experience these things in order for them to germinate. So if you are planting something that is a hardy perennial, it's going to love that because a lot of the hardy perennials need stratification in order to germinate. Some of them are like echinacea, asparagus. I'm trying to think of plants that do not have tiny little seeds because I planted those last year and a lot of them did not germinate because they were surface sown. But those plants that are tiny little seeds that do need that benefit from stratification at least are things like heuchera and hostas and columbine and things like that. Stilbe, they benefit from the stratification and some of them need it, but they don't do that well in the winter sowing method. So you're going to want plants that have larger seeds that you can bury in the soil. I've had success with milkweed, like I said, echinacea and asparagus. A whole lot of plants that have basically larger seeds and are hardy perennials are going to do really well for you. Other plants that can benefit from winter sowing as well are going to be things that are annuals that love the cold. And I have some of these seeds with me over here, so let me share what I have right now with me and we'll expand on that a little bit. So for vegetables, I have cold hardy vegetables like this Japanese flowering kale. I have some spinach. I have also this Chinese cabbage. So things like that. So you're going to have cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, spinach, lettuce. All these things are going to do great when it comes to vegetables. In the flowering department, I have some annuals over here that I wanted to plant. I was planning on planting some poppies, but their seeds are surface sown, so that's not going to work out for me at least. So I have here some status, nigella, and stalk, and these are things that will germinate in colder temperatures, and they also love the cold weather as well. So they're cold hardy and they germinate in colder weather. So winter sowing is going to be perfect for these types of seeds. You can plant a lot of the cold hardy annuals and perennials, whether it is vegetables or flowers, using the winter sowing method. So now let's talk about watering. Do you need to water your winter sowed plants? And that is going to depend on your environment. If you live in a super dry environment, you are definitely going to need to water your plants because they need that moisture. One, for the stratification, and two, for the plants to germinate. If they do dry out, they are not going to germinate. So make sure to keep them moist. You don't want to drown them, but you want to keep them moist. And if you live in an environment that you do receive moisture, whether it is rain or snow, then you just want to keep an eye on them, make sure that they don't dry out. I had to water them several times last season because we weren't receiving enough snow and rain at close intervals. So we would have a big snowstorm and then no snow for a long period of time, and then another big snowstorm. Or we might have some rain in the spring, a lot of it, and then no rain for a week or something or two. So the plants would dry out, and I think that's part of the reason why my surface sown seeds did not germinate. So my advice to you on that also is to place them in a location where you are going to be present. You're going to see them, and they're going to be close to you so that it's easy to water them. I had them far from the house this time because I was thinking it is a sunny location, and I have landscaping fabric in that location, and I did not want to kill the grass. But I think this time I'm going to put them closer to the house so that it's just easier for me to get to them. When it comes to placement, you want to place them in a location that is going to be close to you so that it's easy for you to water them and to check on them. And also you want to place them in a location where they are going to receive sunlight. You don't want them to be in a prolonged periods of sunlight when it comes to the warming temperatures. So once the temperatures start to warm up, if you have them in a full sun location, you might want to transfer them to a location that has less than full sun location if they started to germinate, because if those seeds have germinated already and they're being hit by the sun day in and day out, that sun can cook them. So after they germinate, then you can move them into a semi-sun location, partial sun location. So they will still receive some of that sunlight, but it's not going to fry them. So this way you would be providing your plants with some heat protection, because again, these containers are greenhouses basically. Another thing to pay attention to is wind protection. So last season I had these large bins that I planted seeds in, and I thought the container was heavy enough because I had these 3-inch pots that I placed at the bottom of the container, and I poked holes at the top and the bottom of the bin so that the plants could receive some rain and snow, and I placed it in that open location with the rest of the containers that I had over there, which were the milk jugs. So I had 2 bins and several milk jugs, and my bins just flew everywhere and the wind tossed them around, and all the seeds that I had planted just were mushed up with the dirt everywhere. So I had to replant everything. Some of them though did sprout because there was still some soil at the bottom of the container, and they sprouted. So I just took the little seedlings. I wasn't exactly sure what they were because they were super tiny. They only had 2 leaves on them when they were sprouting, and I just took them, transferred them into different pots. I think some of them were weeds also, so not all of them were plants that I wanted. And I planted them back in the pots with the rest of the seedlings that were germinating, and I ended up with more plants than I expected, because you are going to lose some seeds in the winter sowing method, and the germination rate will also depend on how good the seeds are, how old they are, and all that stuff, and how well they do like that stratification method of the winter sowing, or the winter sowing method. So make sure to put them in a protected location where it's not going to be super windy, and if you have them in a windy location, maybe put something heavy on top of them, but you don't want it to block the light. So maybe like tie them with straps or something like that to keep them in that location and they won't topple around. What I do with these containers over here is I just stack them next to each other, and that protects them from toppling over. With the way how our land is, it's super open, so there's a lot of wind that just comes and circulates everywhere, and that is what causes this giant bin to topple over. So now we're going to be planting the plants that I have over here. Hopefully I have enough soil. I need to buy some soil. That's something you're going to need for winter sowing. Other things that you're going to need is a scissor, some tape. I have here also some labels that I'm going to put inside the containers, a garden marker, and the seeds, of course, milk jug or any container that is clear that has a lid. And with the milk jugs, you do not need the lid, you just need the milk jug itself. So now what you need to do is you're going to cut the container. I need a knife. These scissors are not sharp enough. So we're going to use a knife. So that's something that's probably going to be better depending on how comfortable you feel with the knife. And I think, so you're going to cut the milk jug all around and create a reservoir for the soil to sit in. I'm going to use the knife to create the hole and the scissor to cut. This just works better for me this way. And then you need to leave a little bit of the container still attached to the top, the bottom to the top, so that you can open it this way easily. So I'm going to do this to 5 more containers, and then we are going to plant our seeds in. We got all our containers cut, and now we are going to fill them with some soil. If your soil is super dry, just make sure to moisten it a little bit before you put it in these containers. This soil is not super dry, so I'm safe to put it in here, because super dry soil is going to be hydrophobic, which means it's going to repel the water when you try to water it, and the seeds are going to float everywhere. And to prevent that, you want to moisten the soil before planting your seeds in it. And when you do moisten it, when you squish it, it's going to hold together, and when you let it go, it's going to fall apart pretty easily. So this soil over here is moist enough for me to do just that. Oh, before we do that, we need to create drainage holes, which I totally forgot about. To create the drainage holes, you're just going to poke I like to poke 4 holes at the bottom without cutting myself. And ideally, you want to do that before you cut the container, because it's easier to poke the holes before you cut the container. But because I forgot, I was in a rush, I have to do it now after. Okay, so we got our 4 drainage holes at the bottom of the container. And that's going to prevent the water from pooling in here and creating basically a swimming pool for the seeds rather than a container for them to grow in. And all these containers are pre-washed. You don't want to have like milk or orange juice or anything that you had in there. You don't want that residue in there. So I just wash them all. I rinse them as soon as we are done with them and store them for winter sowing. All the containers are filled, and now we're just going to plant the seeds in each of these containers. But before we plant them, I'm going to decide which one is going to go in which container, which of the seeds are going to go in which of these containers. And then I'm going to label each of these containers with the seeds that I'm going to be planting them in. And the garden marker is great for that because the UV rays do not rub it off. I love this garden marker. I've had great results with it. I've written it on the containers and they did not fade. And I also have these tags that came with, I think, some pots, that 3-inch pots that I bought last season. I have different tags that I love to use, so I saved those for other occasions when I am starting my seeds in the seed starting trays. And I thought these are just clean and they don't take so much space from the container, so I could just stick them in here. So we're going to also write the names on these tags inside the container, so when I do open it up, I would have this tag in it to let me know what's in the container. So we're going to start with this one over here. too big. Some of it is gonna stick. There we go. So we're just gonna take it, put it in the container. Whoop. Over here, and we're also gonna write on the container. I also like to write at the bottom of the container. I'm just trying to find a clean place. It's harder to write at the bottom like that. This way, just in case if something decides to fade away, I'm still going to have somewhere that would let me know what I'm planting in that container. So I'm going to do that to the rest of the containers, and then we'll get to planting the seeds. So everything is labeled. Now we're just going to start planting. Right here. Whoops. So with the Japanese flowering kale, I can sort of tuck these pretty close together. So maybe I'll put in about 10 seeds in here, and I really want to use these for spring containers outdoors. And this year I really want to focus on flowers. Last season I did not plant that many flowers and I was just missing it so much. And this season I just kind of want to go all out on flowers. I want to have them in my vegetable garden everywhere. I mean, I do lots of flowers. If you've been here for a while, then you know how much I love flowers and flower gardens and all these things. So this season I will be, of course, growing food, but I also want to focus a lot on flowers. So I'm going to put about 10 seeds in here. And I like to space them out, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure the soil is even in here. Then I'm going to place a seed, one seed in. So we're going to have one in here in this corner, one right here, one over here. We'll see how many we can fit. Maybe actually I can fit more than 10, because I can sort of space them as they are spaced in the cells inside. So right now I have 6 over here. And these don't need to be buried that deep, just a little bit. Cover them up because they are small seeds. I'm lucky that it was easy to see them because I almost forgot where I planted them. So this one is planted. Set it aside. And we're just gonna keep going with these. For the flowers, I'll probably just plant 5 in there. For the cabbage, I may plant 3 or 4, we'll see. Maybe 3 maximum in there. And for the spinach, I'm just gonna sort of cover it in here, and just make sure to follow the directions on the seed packet to see how deep you need to bury your seeds and all that stuff. Okay, so with the status, I'm supposed to surface sow it, and I did not do that, even though I planted it last year. I forgot. So we're just gonna try it, see what happens. We're just gonna try it. I think I'm gonna put a whole bunch of seeds in here. A lot more than I would if I was burying it. Then I'm just gonna tamp them down a little bit like that into the soil so that they make contact with the soil. I can put one more over here. And we're gonna hope for the best. So now all you need to do is just take some tape. I'm just using some Scotch tape over here, and you're going to tape all around the container. So you're going, because that's going to seal it, and that's what's going to create that sort of greenhouse effect and protect these plants from super cold temperatures when they do start to germinate, and also it will protect the plants from the wind and the containers, and it's not going to tip them over and cause them to go everywhere. I like to go around with a couple wraps around the container just to make sure that everything is secure. And there we go. So now I need to do that to the rest of the containers. And I hope this video was helpful to you guys. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down in the comment section down below. And I did plenty of winter sowing videos, I feel like, already, but I felt like I need to go a little bit more in depth on this subject. So this is why I am making this video again on winter sowing. And if you want to see the rest of the winter sowing videos, I will put a link for a video over here. If I can put a link for the playlist, I'll do that as well. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video. Bye!